about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and we are pleased today that Ilya Shapiro, Cato Institute's Senior Fellow in Constitutional Studies and Editor-in-Chief of the Cato Supreme Court Review, has agreed to return to our show. Mrs. Shapiro will discuss the ramifications of some of the more recent Supreme Court decisions. We do hope you join us for this insightful discussion, and do call us your questions or comments anytime during our broadcast. Our number is 646-652-4620, 646-652-4620. We do hope to hear from you. Ilya, thank you so much for returning to our show. We sincerely appreciate and honored to have you here.
Good to be back. It was an interesting term.
That's great. Well, do you mind if I just read something from James Bovard? He's the policy advisor for the Future of Freedom Foundation, and he's the author of the book Public Policy Hooligans, as well as many other books. And because this sort of capsulizes the way I feel of the three branches of government, I'm not sure if I hold the Supreme Court in less esteem than the other two, or about equal with the other two, which doesn't speak highly at all, regardless of what position I take. I am very concerned about our Supreme Court because that's part of our checks and balances of the three branches of government, and it just seems that they've abdicated all of their responsibilities. And I want to read just a short paragraph of what Mr. Bovard says. He says, the court has turned a blind eye to almost all the civil liberties abuses of the war on terror. It has done nothing to curb the Obama administration's crackdown on journalism and whistleblowers. It has refused to accept any case challenging the Transportation Security Administration's whole body scanners that take explicit birthday suit photos of almost every airline passenger. Instead, the court has often defined out of existence America's Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable searches. And he goes on, and I couldn't agree more. It seems that no matter what it is, if it's a sort of a social issue, if you will, like Obamacare, if it has to do with gay marriage, you name it, either they, in my opinion, they should not have been involved in the first place, and if they were, they should have acted as a check and not a balance of those issues. And so this program is all yours now that I got that off my chest.
Well, there are a number of things going on there. It's not just the civil liberties, war on terror issues that, regardless of what side you're on, that they're not taking. The Second Amendment hasn't been to the Supreme Court despite some pretty egregious violations by states like New York and New Jersey and Maryland, and courts there not recognizing the right that the court recognized in Heller. Whether you're talking about certain Commerce Clause issues and federal regulatory issues that they're not taking. It's frustrating, as frustrated as I get with opinions like King v. Burwell and what they do on Obamacare with the cases that they actually take. It's just as frustrating with the cases that they don't take. I mean, excellent cases involving, again, the whole panoply of issues, commercial speech protections, digital privacy, we file Cato many more briefs supporting petitions for Supreme Court review than we file even in cases that the court grants. And it's a very low grant level, and I think that allows lower courts to do mischief and executive agencies to get away with expanding their own power. But it's a complicated issue. It's not just one thing that the court is or isn't doing. And I think that with respect to Obamacare, Justice Scalia was right in his dissent 2 weeks ago when he said that when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, all the normal rules of constitutional interpretation and the canons of how you construct statutes, all of that goes out the window, and it's just John Roberts principally trying to save Congress's bacon, as it were.
Well, it just seems to me, maybe I'm a simpleton. Many people have called me a simpleton. They're probably right. But if someone came to my front door armed with a firearm, and in other words, I'm talking about the IRS, and they said, look, so-and-so is having an operation.
You're talking about the IRS. Lots of agencies can come to your front door dressed up like SWAT teams. I mean, the agriculture department has paramilitary equipment now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, and they say, all right, so-and-so down the block is in need of an operation. We need a check for $3,000 or $300, whatever, your contribution. And I say, well, no, I'm sorry, I don't have it right now. I can't help them out. They'll throw me in jail. Well, people would say, no, that's not the way it's done in America. Well, that's exactly what Obamacare is. They take money out of my pocket to give it to someone else. And the only difference is instead of the guy knocking at my door to ask me in advance, they take it out without asking me, and then if I don't pay my taxes, then they come to the door and they take me away. But it's the same thing. Why is that so complicated? Why can't the Supreme Court see, it's theft no matter which way you look at it, no matter how you color it, and no matter what you want to call it, the Affordable Care Act. It's not affordable. You can get any medical care for 1/10 the cost if you pay cash. So does that make Affordable Care Act affordable because it's, quote, free, but it costs us 10 times as much? Are these guys lunatics or what? Or am I losing my mind?
Here's the thing. If it was like you just described, then it would be very simple. It would be much simpler as a matter of law, and it would be a much simpler policy debate for or against. But it's not just a redistribution scheme where they increase your taxes and that goes to pay for other people. It's this kind of turning the healthcare industry into a badly managed public utility,
Correct.
Distorting all sorts of price signals. I mean, this is not single payer. If this was single payer, socialized healthcare like exists in many countries, the debate would be much cleaner, it would be much sharper, it would constitutionally be simpler because the government, going back to the 30s, the Supreme Court has held that the government can pass national welfare type policies, and we can argue about that. Obamacare is much different, and whether it was just decided 2 weeks ago or 3 years ago, it's this Rube Goldberg device of complicated subsidies, mandates, regulations, all these different things, and that's why it's so hard to understand. In theory, healthcare is provided by the private healthcare sector. In theory, the insurance industry, separate from the healthcare providers, is private as well. But they're all operating in increasingly narrow bands, and that's why the incentives are broken, the price mechanisms are broken, and the whole system is collapsing upon itself. And that's why it's very difficult to police. And you're right. There's a lot of room for mischief there. I don't know. If I were a little more cynical, I'd say that Obamacare was designed to fail so that it would lead to single payer. As we tried keeping the private sector in, and it didn't work. We got to go to this national thing. I don't know if that really. We're left with a system that combines the worst of capitalism and crony capitalism with the worst of socialism, where
right.
It's more expensive, less access, fewer people going into the medical professions. I mean, the American healthcare system still has a lot going for it. I'd still rather be sick in this country than in most others. But it's in the process of being broken. And you're right. If it was just a matter of providing access to healthcare for more people, that could have been done a lot more easier and cheaper than what Obamacare has done in terms of transforming the entire system for everyone.
Yeah, I may be repeating myself, but about a month ago, I called a hospital in Oklahoma City. It's a cash-only hospital, has excellent doctors, excellent ratings. I have friends in the medical community. They say no problem. They would go there themselves. But you pay cash. You pay cash and you get work done. So what I did is I had a knee replacement a few years ago. I used to be a long distance runner and all that. Ate up my knees. I used to triathlon and whatever when I was younger, and just ate up my knees. But And so I found out they give you a menu of operations and what the cost is, and then you just pay that amount and that's it. There's no questions asked. And then I went back and looked at what it actually cost me for my knee replacement, and the cost was nearly 10 times as much, if not more. 10 times as much in our present system than it would be if I paid cash. So, I mean, the people in the Supreme Court must know that this system is very expensive. Why do they persist in it? I mean, they're saying, hey, listen, guys, we can get everything done a lot cheaper if we get rid of the government, take the government out of the equation. But no, we're going to make it 10 times more expensive because we make it more affordable for everyone. And now, to me, that's lunatic thinking. But our Supreme Court judges don't have that type of thinking.
The Supreme Court isn't supposed to be taking into account those kinds of political and economic considerations. Here's what happened at the Supreme Court. The 4 liberal justices don't see a judicially enforceable limit on federal power. So it comes down to people like Roberts and Kennedy. Roberts is a minimalist, a judicial restraint guy. Okay, he's not an originalist. He's not a get the law right and political consequences be damned. He wants not to rock the boat. And so 3 years ago in the individual mandate case, he said, well, we'll bend over backwards to defer to Congress. If there's any possible way of avoiding striking this down on constitutional grounds, of finding that this fits within constitutionally authorized federal power, we're going to do that. And he posed himself the conundrum of how to keep Obamacare in place without really expanding federal power in any other area. And that's why he came up with that decision that it was a tax for some purposes, but not a tax, that you can't force people to buy regulating commerce. So, that opinion that he wrote really was a ticket good for that train only, in the sense that that's not going to be a precedent for some new regulatory scheme or something. Like, he made it clear about that. The liberals, they wrote separately, and Justice Ginsburg said, well, no, of course you can force someone to buy something if that's part of a national regulation. But he did not say that. He said it's a tax. Anyway, so he did that. 2 weeks ago, he said, well, this is a statutory case, so it's not a matter of finding that this is constitutionally authorized, but he's saying, look, this is a crazy design scheme, but how would they want it to operate? Would they not want these subsidies to go to people and then they couldn't afford health care? Even if it's written that way, even if that's the most natural reading, well, they screwed up. I'm gonna fix it for them and let it operate as they want. And if the people don't like it, then the political process is their remedy. And Kennedy joined him on that for whatever reason. Kennedy isn't known for his statutory opinions. That's why he doesn't write very many of them. He joins them. He writes the constitutional ones. And that's what you had happen. This is the problem with having judges, even ones appointed by Republicans, who aren't committed to statutory interpretation and the rule of law, but are more trying to have this role as judges, shouldn't really be involved in politics. They shouldn't have that significant opinion in terms of structure and programs and things like that. So it really goes back not to just Obamacare or the appointment of the wrong justices in the last 10 or 20 years. It goes back to the 1930s when the Supreme Court started reading certain provisions of the Constitution expansively and also bifurcating our rights such that certain rights are more equal than others in effect. And at that point, constitutional law started deviating more and more from what the Constitution actually says. So this is not something that happened overnight. It's a long-term trend in terms of how we do judging in the country.
I tell you, I'd rather have a job in a coal mine 2 miles underneath the surface of the earth than having your job. I mean, because I couldn't stand these guys. I mean, I couldn't tolerate the inconsistencies of what they should be and what they are doing. I wouldn't have the you must have the patience of Job to do this job of talking about these guys. I would lose it altogether. It seems that whenever you hear about the Supreme Court, you always hear about Supreme Court justice. They give a name, then they say Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative or progressive. In other words, they label them. So what they're saying is that this is not an impartial court representing the people and upholding the Constitution. This is a Supreme Court of political ideologues professing their political ideology, and that's the way they're going to vote. I mean, that's basically what they're telling us constantly, and we as Americans, and I'm sure the average American wouldn't know the difference, but we get to believe that really the Supreme Court is just another political grandstanding decision-making group that will codify whatever the president or the Congress wants, depending on their political ideology. What happened? We're okay. Okay, I thought we almost had a connection problem. Okay, and am I just totally off the page? Should I just sort of hang things up and go to a nursing home?
The media, that could well be, but I'll answer your question nevertheless. The media has to paint a narrative. They use shorthand, this liberal conservative or the party of the president that appointed them. As we see, there are different kinds of Republican appointees. There are different kinds of Democratic appointees. What you don't see is that even this term, which seemed to be more divisive than last term or some other ones, about half the cases came out unanimously. And so there's a lot that the Supreme Court does where you don't have these divisions. And there's, even in the 5-4 cases, I think there was about a third of them which did not split on so-called conservative versus liberal grounds with Kennedy as the swing vote. So there's a lot more going on than simply, every case you can predict what's going to happen. The high-profile cases, obviously, the marriage or guns or campaign finance, voting rights, death penalty, Obamacare, these cases, which are the ones that make the front pages and lead the evening news, those do tend to be broken down because there are less obvious legal standards in some of these areas, the way that the jurisprudence has developed. But for the most part, the court is not politicized in that way. And the difference is when we see those 5-4 liberal conservative splits aren't based on politics, but based on fundamental differences in methodology. The idea that the meaning of the Constitution or of a statute can change over time versus that you interpret it as the words that are written as they're originally understood to mean. Those are very important, significant methodological differences. They largely correlate to political preferences, but certainly not always. But that's what's going on. And when the media only covers those big cases and they need to tell shorthand, especially on TV, you have limited time. That's the perception that they convey.
Yeah. Well, I object to this 5-4 business because if it's that close, that means we have 5 saying yes, 4 saying no, vice versa. Then you have a problem because you almost have a split decision. And if you have a split decision, there's got to be a problem. Now, I would go more for 3/4. There are 9. How many Supreme Court judges are there? 9? 9. Okay, 9. Now, I would say if you got 6 out of the 9, okay, that would hold a little bit more credence to me. All right? But this 5-4, you see 5-4, you hear about that often. And why don't they make it 7 out of 9 or 6 out of, a minimum 6 out of 9? I mean, that way you get a consensus right across the board because typically the court is almost equally balanced between, conservatives and liberals and whatever. And you do get more of a consensus. Why is it just a majority?
Because that's the way courts work. I mean, it would take a constitutional amendment to change that. It's like on an appellate court, there's typically 3 judges, and 2 to 1 gets you a verdict, gets you a ruling.
Yeah.
You said 6-3, so that would be you need 2/3. Well, King v. Burwell, the Obamacare case, was 6-3. There are a lot of cases that are 6-3 that you might not agree with either. So, or that are equally divisive. There's some structural proposals now with people dissatisfied with the rulings. And by the way, every year, now this term it seems liberals are more satisfied than conservatives. Other years, next year with affirmative action and abortion and other cases, we could see a complete reverse. This year we've seen a few proposals. Ted Cruz wants retention elections. That is, every couple of years or maybe every 4 years, you have the justices are all, and they're not running against someone, but there's an up or down vote whether to keep them or not. I'm wary of that. I'm wary of introducing.
Oh yeah, right. That causes more problems than it's worth, I think. Yeah.
Other people are proposing term limits. So you get an 18-year term, and they're staggered. So there's a vacancy every 2 years, meaning each presidential term you get 2, no more, no less vacancies to fill. It's unclear to me whether that would really change anything. I mean, there are some structural or theoretical attractiveness to term limits like that. Historically, the average for the first 150 years, the average Supreme Court justice served about 15 years. The last 30, 40 years, as they're appointed younger and live longer, the terms have been much. There's no super duper Supreme Court. There's no Deus Ex Machina Inspector General of the U.S. government that's plenipotentiary philosopher king or something. It's human beings who are running the government, and ultimately the government and each branch of the government is only as good as the failings of human beings. And so the fundamental problem is the corruption of the Constitution, as I said, going back to the 30s and 40s. Once you have that, and once the differences in interpretive methodologies are that big, of course you're going to have a politicization of the Senate judiciary during the confirmation hearings. And you're going to have these sorts of litmus tests, whether it be abortion, whether it be gay rights, whether it be gun rights, whatever your kind of key hot button issue is that you can exert political pressure on the senators who are voting yay or nay on those nominees. That's what it's going to be. Now, perhaps, and this might go for executive officials as well, perhaps we ought to be using the power of impeachment more. Historically, it's been reserved for, if someone is convicted of some crime or under investigation for something serious like that. But perhaps it should be used more but again, what is that standard? If 40% of the people are still going to be supporting that sort of decision that 60% of the people think is, derogates from the Constitution, is that enough to impeach when it's just that sort of judgment? Yeah. And on judicial issues, most people aren't informed enough. So how do you actually use those tools? So again, it's a systematic issue. It's not just a matter of people aren't policing what these judges are doing. It's it's a decade-long cultural shift that leads to a political shift that leads to a legal shift.
Well, it almost seems as if the way the Supreme Court operates over time is that at one, with that proverb, that thou shalt not kill. And the Supreme Court, the way they look at it, they say, well, when they had that was thou shalt not kill. That was before guns, So that means you can't stab anybody. But now that we have guns, it means something different. You can shoot somebody because thou shalt not kill has to do with knives and not guns. I'm making that up, obviously. But that's almost, it seems, the way they rule on items. They say, well, things have changed because we have this now where before we didn't, so now we can rule in that favor because it was not excluded previously because it didn't exist. Well, you can play that game, and as a result, you have a bastardization, basically, of our Constitution and our constitutional...
kind of twisting that or interpreting it extremely loosely. And that kind of the height of that sort of judging was in the 60s and the 70s, and that's where the term judicial activism comes from. Unfortunately, the response to that by conservatives, because it was typically the liberals who were the activists, but the response to that was pacifism or ultra-judicial restraint. So rather than saying you're wrong in your theory, here's a better way of judging or a better way of interpreting the Constitution, they said, why are you unelected judges striking down, rewriting the law of the that the political branches that the people have passed. And so you now have, in many cases, Obamacare is the leading example, this unholy merging of judicial activism and judicial pacifism, where instead we should just have judges interpreting the law as best they can and letting the political issues, the political chips fall where they may. And so when you have the liberal activism with the conservative restraint reaction, that's what you get. And neither one of those is good judging, in my view.
If you had to rate the Supreme Court in how it has interpreted the Constitution and protected the individual rights on an A to an F, just like you were in school, how would you grade them? I know, unfair question. I know that this is Liberty Talk Radio. We ask all sorts of unfair questions, and I'm sorry for that.
Depends on what scale, relative to the original view of the Constitution, relative to each other. It's
to the intent of the Constitution, basically.
Well, not the intent, the original public meaning, but
yeah.
Nobody gets an A. It depends on it depends on the area of law. They're better and worse in different areas of law, I'd say. The Supreme Court has been pretty good on the First Amendment, for example. Pretty bad on restricting federal power to the doctrine of limited and enumerated powers. Those are probably the best and worst examples.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
As a whole, there's no one that I agree with, significantly more than any other. For example, this term, Cato filed in 15 cases. We went 8 and 7, which is worse than we have done in previous years, but still better than the government. So at least there's that. So of those 15 cases, Roberts and Kennedy were on our side 8 times. They were the leading ones. I think Kagan was the worst. She was on our side 5 times. The rest of them were either 6 or 7. So it's not like a huge difference. And some cases you might say are more significant than others. So there's no real correlation. In previous years, generally, Thomas, Alito, Kennedy, those ones agree with me more than most of the others. But again, it just depends on the mix of cases. And one thing I will say, and this is what we started discussing, was that the Supreme Court isn't taking enough cases. This year they came out with 16 opinions. That's not enough. There's a lot more problems with what's going on in the lower courts. 20 years ago, they were taking more than double that, 25 years ago. So it's not that the lower courts all of a sudden are doing a much better job and the Supreme Court doesn't need to step in. It's just that the decision was made that, we're not going to take so many cases for whatever reason.
Yeah. I want to read something further from Bovard's article. He says, America's prisons are overflowing in part because the Supreme Court has objected to few of the 4,500 plus criminal statutes Congress enacted. Thanks to the threat of ruinous mandatory minimum penalties, 97% of defendants plead guilty. As Justice Antonin Scalia noted in 2012 dissent, the Supreme Court presents grave risk of prosecutory overcharging that effectively compels an innocent defendant to avoid massive risk by pleading guilty to a lesser offense. What's your opinion of that?
Plea bargaining? Yeah. The thing is, the system simply wouldn't work without it. We would not be, we'd be holding people before trial for years and years and years because there's simply not enough resources. In some cases, it's probably, the problem fundamentally here isn't the institution of plea bargaining, it's over-criminalization. We have so many laws on the books, especially at the federal level, but at the state as well, that Harvey Silverglade, who's a lawyer and scholar, sometimes collaborates with Cato, wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day that says basically that every professional, as you're going about your daily life in a major metropolitan area, you generally are committing 3 felonies a day of some kind, because it's overwritten. And you're right, prosecutors just it's not that they're overzealous, but they have such a smorgasbord of charges to play with that you're going to be found with something. So that is an issue, and this is something I think that has support. Reforming that has support across the political spectrum. You see, the so-called civil rights group and the ACLU and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers are supported by the Heritage Foundation and Cato, and the Koch brothers are spending a lot of money on this. So I think there is going to be some change coming from Congress to try to have criminal justice reform. But it's again, the kind of the plea bargaining issues are symptoms. The underlying problem is overcriminalization.
Okay. Well, since I am now a criminal, by definition, by your definition, I'm now a criminal. We were still going to need to take a break for about a minute. Would you please hold on during the break, and then we'll be right back, Elliot?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. We're pleased to have Ilya Shapiro, Cato Institute Senior Fellow in Constitutional Studies, with us, discussing some of the recent Supreme Court decisions that affect every one of us. And I'm a very unhappy camper when it comes to the Cato Institute. And unfortunately, although Mr. Shapiro's doing an excellent job, I don't feel any better. I want him to say something to make me feel better, but I guess it is what it is. So we have to live with it. Ilya, can we get him on the there you are. Okay, very good. You're back on the audio video. What is you want to make some comments on the upholding Obamacare and legalizing gay marriage? What would you like to say about those two issues?
Well, we've talked about Obamacare. I mean, gay marriage, I think, was an easy case for me. I think Kennedy got it right for the wrong reasons, and the dissenting justices got it wrong for the right reasons, in the sense that, I filed a brief talking about how the Equal Protection Clause guarantees equality under the law, and what we're talking about here isn't the definition of marriage or what it means. It's a state licensing regime like any other, and the state treats same-sex couples differently than opposite-sex couples. For what reason? Ultimately, I don't think it has a strong enough reason. I don't see a reason why the state needs to be involved in marriage in the first place. And I'm hoping that some states now take the step. Hoping Oklahoma would have done that a long time ago, just gotten out of the marriage business altogether. But the way that Kennedy wrote the opinion, it wasn't clear. You kind of throw some liberty together with some equality, shake it up, sprinkle on some dignity, and you've got something. It's kind of a metaphysical musing. But this opinion was, I think everybody was expecting it. The public opinion has shifted so rapidly, and the Supreme Court tries not to get too far ahead or behind of public opinion in generally. I think if the case had gone the other way, we'd end up with the same result in all but maybe 5 states in about 5 or so years. But that was a win in my books, even if Kennedy's opinion was incoherent.
Right.
And you were talking about good news. I'd rather live now than 30 years ago. Look at the percentage of your income that you're spending on food or utilities or housing. That's all gone down. You have more leisure. You have more, on average, the American family. The iPhone. I have more power in this little device than the leading scientists had in a whole mainframe 30, 40 years ago. So our lives have improved in many ways, and especially if you're a woman or a racial minority or someone who's not part of the so-called mainstream culture, it's a lot easier to live in this country than it once was. That's as much or more a cultural thing as it is a political or legal thing. And remember, most of life is not what the Supreme Court rules on or what Congress votes on. It's civil society, and we still have that. My colleague Dan Mitchell, who's an economist, says that government growth is terrible, but as long as the GDP grows faster than government, that's sort of the magic bullet. Now, we've been in trouble there the last few years, but we're not that far behind at the end of the day. So, we only have a year and a half, less than that, of this administration, the most radical one in history. But we'll see what happens. America is resilient, and as I said, I'd still rather be living now than 20 years ago. So I think more liberty in that sense. But it's like boiling a frog. We're not going to lose our liberty overnight. And certainly some of the changes legally, politically, culturally that we've seen of late are not healthy. And if those sorts of things continue for decades, then we won't be where we want to be 50 years from now.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Many people have said that, well, now the country's gone to hell in a handbasket now that they allowed gay marriage. What's next? But to me, I said it should never have been an issue that our Supreme Court judges had to rule on. It should, on the outskirts, it should have been a state issue. Even more so, it really is a family issue. It's a tribal issue, if you will. If your tribe, your family, your culture, where you live, if that's permissible to everyone, that's fine. It's an individual rights issue. So, and I agree with you 100%. They ruled properly for the wrong reason, and I agree with that analogy, with that statement. What about now? We talked about Obamacare, and now what do you think? Some accuse the Supreme Court with siding with public opinion or political ideology other than the Constitution itself. Is there some truth to that?
Well, as I said, the Supreme Court never gets far ahead or behind public opinion. With Obamacare, that's always been unpopular. So in a sense, John Roberts, if he was trying to follow popular opinion, did not follow it there. I don't think that's what he was trying to do. I don't think that's what the justices were trying to, the majority was trying to do in general. There's this sense that courts or John Roberts, kind of judicial minimalists, have this idea that courts should interfere as little as possible, try to remove themselves from the discussion. I mean, they haven't really been that successful. I think it's a fool's game that all these big cases are coming up. You're not going to remove yourself from the discussion. I think the Supreme Court is, if anything, more in the political debate, having ruled on Obamacare twice as it has, than had it gone the other way. And that's just another reason why I don't think the John Roberts of the world should be taking into consideration these non-legal, non-judicial considerations. Again, I'm not saying that he's trying to follow popular opinion. I'm saying that he's considering how will the court be perceived, and he misjudged that because the reputation, public confidence in the court has gone down in the last 5-10 years. Now, it's not nearly as low as Congress or other institutions, but that's declined as well, and that's not a good thing, because at the end of the day, the court doesn't enforce its own rulings, and so if nobody respects it, then we're going to lose that particular check. And so by refusing to check and balance the other branches, it in effect is eviscerating itself.
Yeah. What do you attribute the fewer number of cases that the Supreme Court is hearing and considering today versus years ago? What's the reason for that, and what's their justification?
Justices are more cautious. They don't want to take on a case that then it turns out there's some procedural defect. They have very high bars for what the term of art is, the legal vehicle. If there's a problem with the case itself, is it there's some procedural thing, or it's the lower court might have been wrong, but it's kind of a one-off. The Supreme Court is not into error correction, they keep saying. So they're not going to take a case just because the lower court was wrong. There has to be some really big issue or a conflict between the circuits. But even there, in those cases, they haven't taken a lot. They've taken fewer of those circuit splits, or what a lot of people would consider to be big cases. And I think, again, this is this sort of this minimalism. And also, in terms of if there's political blocks or methodological blocks, nobody is sure how Justice Kennedy is going to align, and so it takes 4 votes to take up a case. And the liberals aren't sure that Kennedy's with them, the conservatives aren't sure that Kennedy's with them, and so they just end up not taking the case.
Okay. Now, some cases seem to be very plain. I mean, Obamacare is an excellent example where you're forcing people to pay into a fund for health care. To me, it's abdication of rights, of liberty.
That's not how Obamacare works. Again, if it was just your taxes go up to pay for people's health care, that's a different type of system. Okay, this is, you regulate what kind of policies you can have. Everybody has to have a policy unless you're very poor. Employers have to provide health care, provide certain types of policies, or else they get penalized. So there's all this complicated network of subsidies, penalties, regulations, mandates. It's not a simple redistributive scheme. And insurance companies who are on board with Obamacare before anyone else, because they're guaranteed a certain rate of return. They're not going to make huge amounts of profit, but they're never going to lose. And so that kind of safety level of profit, CEOs like that, because that means they're guaranteed to keep growing and they keep getting their bonuses. So there's it's a crony capitalist system with socialistic elements. As I said, it's not this national health care.
So it's a violation of individual rights. Really, is not an issue.
Well, no, it depends how you base it. There's a violation of individual rights in terms of having to buy the insurance, except now we're told it's a tax. But that's still a violation to be taxed for not doing something. There's a violation of personal choice. If I have to have a policy that has these 800 things in it, but I only want the first 400 things, well, that's illegal. You can't buy that policy.
Right.
That's a violation of your individual. Even if there's an insurance company that wants to sell you that policy, they can't. If I see some policy that's, I live in Virginia, if there's some company in Utah that sells some insurance product that I really like, I can't buy that. You can't buy across state lines. So there's all sorts of restrictions that do violate individual rights, in addition to the federal government not supposed to be acting in this way in the first place under the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, as a person who's not as schooled as you are, it is very, very frustrating, and I'm sure for many, many people it's very frustrating, and they quite frankly do not understand. And as I, for some reason, I understand what you're saying, I comprehend what you're saying, it just doesn't hold water for me. And not what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, is that their process just does not seem to hold water for me. It seems to be just more black and white, and they muddy it with all sorts of exceptions and then sort of remold it to fit a certain ideology, and then they approve it. And it just unnerves the heck out of me when I think that way. Am I way off base or what? I guess I am. What happened? Hold on a second.
I turned off the video because it was getting all pixelated and stuff. I think.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
So there was this moment. It's for decades. It's been the Democrats' project to have national health care, but they know there's not popular support for that. When they momentarily, for a couple of flukes, had a supermajority in the Senate, a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate in 2009, they still didn't have enough votes to have national health care or even a public option.
Telephone number.
And so they tried to do as much of the national health care while preserving a semblance of private sector running it and a semblance of the states having these exchanges. And well, as we know, half the states didn't sign up for the Medicaid expansion. Most of the states didn't create their own exchanges because it's not a good deal, and we're left with more of this, patchwork quilt that doesn't work because it goes against the laws of economics. And the lobbyists got in there, and so the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the healthcare, the managed care companies got in there, hospital companies, and they got their bit. And so this really, it did not fulfill the goal of providing more health care to more people for cheaper.
From an economic point of view, does the Supreme Court look at the percent of government, the cost of government that's attributed to Medicare, Medicaid, and like issues, and it's taking up a larger and larger portion. And then the value of our unfunded debt. If you listen to Dr. Kutlikoff of University of Boston, we're talking about $1 quadrillion, a quarter of $1 quadrillion in unfunded debt, which means we will never ever be able to pay it off, no matter what happens to our economy. Do they ever take that into consideration, that this just ain't working?
Does who? I mean, the courts don't.
The courts don't. Does anyone present to the court that say we should do away with all federal health care because it is becoming exponentially more expensive?
Well, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're saying you
can get in, but you can't get out, right?
You were complaining earlier that you don't want the court to be a super legislature, but now you want them to be a super legislature.
But legislated it in. I want them to take it out. I want them to reverse their decision, basically.
Well, it'll take a while to do that. I mean, this was based on, as I said, opinions from the 30s and 40s when Social Security was first passed. I mean, that Social Security is facially, to have a national pension program is not within the constitutional power. It might be popular. I think the constitutional amendment at this point certainly would pass to shore up Social Security. But the way that ultimately it was allowed was to say that that it's a tax on employment, and the government is allowed to tax interstate. It's a complicated sort of basis, but you're right that a lot of people think that Social Security is not going to be for them, and it probably won't. But the crisis generated by Medicare and Medicaid is greater than that by Social Security.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I'm frustrated. What is your what kind of influence does your organization have on the Supreme Court, if any, and what role do you play?
Well, we file briefs and we write articles and we blog that, these things get read by the clerks and sometimes the justices. Occasionally you get cited, but it's increasingly rare that the court cites amicus briefs. You don't have direct knowledge of how much you've influenced them. We know we have a good reputation that's grown in the last decade in the legal community. What we're doing is respected by the legal elites, as it were, of which the justices and lower court judges are obviously a part. But it's it's sort of the eternal question when you're fundraising as a nonprofit, as a think tank. How do you measure your success?
Right.
On one hand, our donations are up significantly in the last few years. Does that mean we're being rewarded for being effective, or does that mean people are frustrated with what's going on and things are really going down the tubes, and so they're giving us money to try to counteract it, right? Probably a bit of both. All of the people all of the so-called experts are telling us that we're doing a good job. Even those who disagree with the libertarian ideology are saying, well, Cato, they're a respectable organization and we can trust them to have integrity rather than act as, political partisans or something like that. But you just got to take it one day at a time. And I tell you said, how can I possibly do my job? And it's because I wake up in the morning and I think about, how best can I promote liberty today? And how, this particular issue, I haven't written about that in a while. Let's see if I can get an op-ed published somewhere on this. Or, I get requests like people like you or TV or whatever, or print reporters. Certainly, all of the leading print reporters at the end of the term were coming to ask my views on, what is the theme of the term, what's going on at the court. That's gratifying to me personally and to Cato because it means that, our perspective matters in the national debate.
Right. Well, it almost scares me to think if there were not people like you, what the end result would be. If there's not this voice out there saying, hey guys, remember, we are a constitutional republic and we espouse the individual freedom, and here are the 25 reasons why you should vote this way. I'm sure you have some influence, and you do provide them with at least some food for thought, if anything else. It almost scares me if there were not organizations such as yours. And in the interest of full disclosure, I have been a financial supporter of the Cato Institute for years, and I will continue to do so. You guys do fabulous work, and you maintain my support. And I read many of the articles that are sent to me almost on a weekly basis. Now, where do you see the Supreme Court going? Can you give us a little futuristic look? Because we only have about 3 or 4 minutes to go, and I want to see where we're going.
Next term, the big cases, there's affirmative action, racial preferences in college admissions. That one's coming up again. That was from UT Austin. There's a one-man, one-vote case about how you draw districts, whether you count total population or just citizen population, because you can have disparities in power where one vote means more in one district than another. You have abortion is going to be taken up. There's a number of cases. The labor law, whether public sector unions can force non-members to pay dues.
Right.
Well, that seems to be a First Amendment violation because you're effectively, in the public sector unions, you're aiming to change government policy even when you're collective bargaining rather than engaging in political activity. So that could move the bar significantly in the labor law area. So at this point next year, we could say, oh, well, this term was conservative after a liberal one. And it's really all about the mix of cases. But long term, look, in 2016, the presidential election next year, 3 justices are going to be over 80, and another one is 76 or 77. So we're going to have some vacancies in the short term. So who's in the White House in the next 4-8 years is going to be shaping the Supreme Court for decades.
Would it be interesting if we got a libertarian in the warehouse, in the White House? I should call it the warehouse, shouldn't I? That would be interesting. That you see quite a change in the attitude of how we do things. But I think that's a long shot. Do you feel that down the road the Supreme Court will be more friendly to the Constitution, or you think we're going to be straying even more so away? And let me ask you this. This is an oddball question. I'm going to throw this in. There are many financial analysts and noted economists who are concerned that we may be on the verge of some sort of real financial collapse, not like a 2008 where they papered it over, but another 2008 without having the ability to paper it over, and there can be very, very hard times. You think a financial anomaly of some sort would affect the Supreme Court in its decisions on some of these issues?
Well, they're real people living in the real world. We're looking right now in Greece. What happens when you ignore the laws of economics?
Right.
We're a while away from Greece, but states like Illinois are bankrupt. Many cities in California have gone bankrupt. It depends what sorts of issues are going to come up, and again, you will have justices that ignore the Constitution or ignore statutes to do what they think is right in a crisis, and there's others that will say, look, we're going to interpret this law and leave it to Congress to fix if there are political problems.
Yeah, because I just wonder where we're going, because right now we need trillions of dollars. I forgot I had an exact figure in my head. It fell out, but it was well over $1 trillion that we would need just to update our infrastructure. And then you can go on with trillions of dollars on all these other programs to bring them back into line, which I said is quite frankly not enough money in the world to do all this work. Will, do you think the ideology of America would be say, hey, we tried all this collectivism, and all it's bought us is a tremendous amount of debt. Maybe we need to look at the free market once again. You think that'll ever happen, or is that pie in the sky?
Well,
wishful
that's what
thinking?
Cato's trying to convince people of. That's what my colleagues that do economic policy and welfare policy are certainly pushing. And again, it's America is a large ship of state. It doesn't turn on a dime. In smaller parliamentary countries, you can have radical or significant changes in policy just based on each election. In America, you're never going to get that because it's such a large and complicated country. But there are green shoots, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, over 200 years ago, the Anti-Federalists, I think, had a good case. I think they had a good point in their point of view, rather having a constitutional republic, having a confederation of states, and I tell you, I'm siding with them more and more as I get older and older and older. Well, we're just about out of time. Ilya, I'd like to give you the last minute to brief our people as to your organization, where you can be reached if you'd like to be reached, and anything else that you'd like to offer them.
Sure. Well, Cato is now 38 years old. It's the nation's largest and most prominent libertarian think tank. That means we don't like government involvement in pretty much anything, and we work on the full panoply of public policy issues. I do constitutional law, and I edit the Cato Supreme Court Review, which will now be in September published for its 14th volume, and we try to make all of our publications accessible to the educated layman, not just the expert or the lawyer or legal scholar in my circumstance. You can email me at ishapiro@cato.org. My Twitter handle is @ishapiro. Cato's website, cato.org. Lots of information, whatever you're most interested in. And you're welcome to donate as well. Joe, we appreciate your support. And
always will.
All sorts of, you can find online various goodies at different giving levels, and we have retreats and pocket constitutions and books and all sorts of different, hoodies and lots of paraphernalia.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Ilya, for being our guest. I hope you will consent to being our guest sometime in the near future once again.
Sure. Well, when I'm in Tulsa, July 21st for the Federalist Society, we'll have to meet up.
Oh yes, we'll be in contact and we'll get together somehow. Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much. Folks,
Thank
this
you.
is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. We'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away. That's the easy way out, obviously. Or you're striving. There's something you can have to do. You're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, as she says, there is no middle ground. Folks, until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.